Hey everyone, it's Anime Reaper coming at you with another What If Naruto Found Uzuamki Library Part 3. This fanfiction was written by S. Targon. If you like this what if and want more like it, please like and subscribe to my channel and don't forget to check the description and leave a comment down below. Without further ado, let's get started. Chapter 3, First Mission. Disclaimer, I own nothing, Mori's the pity. Teammate. Chapter 3. Hinata was the first to arrive at Training Area 19. She'd left home earlier than strictly necessary, but she was happy to be out of the Hyuga compound. It was, she supposed, somewhat shameful that she felt happier away from her ancestral home. She knew that her father would see that as a demeaning lack of pride in her heritage. Hinata sometimes wondered what her mother would think, if she were still alive. Shino arrived a few minutes later. The Abarame boy was quiet, merely nodding to her when she greeted him. At first Hinata wondered if he was angry with her for disagreeing with him at lunch yesterday. But as she watched him examine the base of one of the trees, she remembered how quiet he had been at the academy. Perhaps he just didn't have anything to say. Kurenai arrived with another boy, and it took a moment for Hinata to recognize Naruto without the orange jumpsuit that had been his trademark over the last couple of years. He was frowning, making Hinata wondered what was wrong. Naruto was always smiling and joking, and for him to appear so grim. As they approached, Kurenai Sensei put her hand on his shoulder and said something too quiet to hear. Naruto nodded and shook himself, like a dog with wet fur, and then he straightened up and let out a sigh. Naruto grinned at everyone and she felt her face begin to flush again. "I'm glad to see you all got here early," Kurenai called out as they walked up. "Punctuality is important for what we do, or rather, being too late can be fatal." Hinata felt her stomach tighten at the Jonin's grim words, but tried not to let her fear show. Father would be mortified that any Hyuga, let alone his own daughter, would show fear before others. Not that Hinata had done that well at abiding by her father's wishes. Shino didn't visibly react to their sensei's words. Instead, he just continued to look at her through his ever-present dark glasses. Hinata envied his reserve. Hinata did not know quite what to make of Naruto's new uniform. He looked rather good in it, she had to admit. It was also certainly more practical, but his orange jumpsuit had become such a part of him that it seemed strange to see him without it. The quiet way he approached with Kurenai Sensei was also at odds with his normal behavior. All of this made Hinata concerned for her teammate. She liked the Naruto that always smiled and tried again, and she didn't want to see that change. As she became more upset, a sudden thought gave her pause. She liked the loud, brassy Naruto, but did he necessarily like it himself? He'd looked so dejected after the genin exam, and her mind wandered back to other times that he'd been down. Were those truly the only times he'd been upset, or were they the only times he let it show? Reading people was a high art among the Hyugas, ever since one of her clan leader ancestors took his Byakugan to a new level. Hinaro-san was the first to actively read a person's intentions from the tension in their bodies and the way they moved. The observations he made were said to be devastatingly accurate, and the Fire Lord often hired him to evaluate his courtiers and to aid his spymaster in weeding out the disloyal. His eyes were said to be acute enough to detect variations in a shinobi's pulse rate by observing the vibrations in the skin over their carotid arteries. There is even a rumor that fear of this formidable skill was what led the Hokage family to begin wearing their traditional masks. As with most of her family's arts, Hinata was not very adept with body reading. She could see the disappointment and resentment that festered in the eyes of the clan elders, but they also didn't bother to conceal their feelings. Her cousin Niji, on the other hand, was said to be able to see things that the adults wished to keep unnoticed. From most people, Hinata could merely guess at their mental state. However, she had also spent a long time studying Naruto. She was no expert on his mercurial moods, but as she watched him approach, she didn't get a sense of sadness or anger from him. He was just reserved, in an odd way. At the same time, he also seemed very focused. When Kurenai Sensei spoke, Naruto took in every word. Not even Iruka Sensei at his angriest could command so much of Naruto's attention. Hinata found herself respecting the Jonin even more now, though she wondered what she had said or done to Naruto to earn such respect. Her curiosity became even stronger when the woman reached into the pouch at her waist and removed a pair of scrolls. She handed one to Shino and the other to Hinata. These are some exercises I'd like you to perform on your own, outside of our team meetings. They are mostly speed and endurance building exercises, though there are also activities that should build up your chakra capacity and control. Hinata carefully placed the scroll in her weapons pouch. Ano, Sensei, what will we be doing during team meetings? Despite Kurenai Sensei's kindly demeanor, Hinata still found it embarrassingly difficult to speak out or ask questions. That's a good question, Hinata, Kurenai replied evenly. I'd like this time to be spent working on things that would benefit from us all being together. For the speed and endurance training, I will leave it to each of you to make sure you are pushing yourselves as hard as you can. Remember, it won't just be you paying the penalty if you don't. But a team also needs to learn how to fight together. Sparring will let you test and improve your skills against one another, and it will also let you come to understand each other's fighting styles. From what I saw yesterday, they are quite different. Kurenai smiled, perhaps a little grimly. That knowledge will prove very useful when you fight together as a team. You will know how your teammates will react and be able to move with them smoothly to counter any threats. A well-trained shinobi team can move together like a well-oiled machine, and becomes much more effective than just the sum of its members. We call this extra bonus synergy. Hinata nodded slowly. She vaguely remembered something about that concept from lessons at the academy last year. Naruto frowned thoughtfully but didn't say anything. With that, Kurenai put them to work. We'll start with just taijutsu today. No other techniques for right now. Just hand to hand. Hinata, why don't you and Naruto start? Light contact only. Hinata was a little nervous about sparring with Naruto first thing, but tried to control her reactions. Sensei was right, she needed to know her teammates as well as she knew herself. Naruto moved a little stiffly at first, perhaps because of his new clothes. Hinata activated her Byakugan so she could see his tenketsu points, but she didn't push any chakra out of her palms as she struck. This way she could tell if she struck true, which wasn't as often as she liked, but didn't disable her teammate. Naruto jolted back on his heels when her palm slipped around his block and struck him flat on the chest. He smiled ruefully at her and shook his head. Her stomach gave an odd wobble as he dropped back into a ready stance. Naruto didn't seem to be upset that she'd scored on him. In fact, his look was almost approving. That thought made her falter and she almost missed a block. Naruto, of course, was pulling his punches at the last instant, neither of them was out to hurt the other. Nonetheless, his knuckles still jarred her shoulder. Mortified at her slip, Hinata grabbed his sleeve, wrapping her fingers around his arm just above the wrist. She brought her other hand in low, aiming for the tenketsu point right above the hara, between the navel and diaphragm. Naruto twisted backwards to avoid the blow, but her hold on his arm limited his motion. Naruto purposefully fell backwards. Hinata let go of his arm so she could chamber a kick, but then realized that he had a handful of her jacket clenched in his fist now. Her unpredictable teammate rolled onto his back, pulling his knees up to his chest, and Hinata was yanked forward off her feet. He let go of her shoulder as her stomach came to rest on his sandals. Hinata barely saw the pleased grin on his face before she was launched into the air. Hinata found herself upside down, flying backwards through the air. She curled up to speed her rotation, and managed to get her feet under her before she landed, her back to Naruto. Good recoveries, both of you, Kurenai said, and with the Byakugan still active, Hinata could see her smiling without having to turn her head. She was embarrassed at her slip, and could see her father's disapproving glare in her mind, but no one here seemed to notice or care. Nonetheless, Naruto seemed a bit more focused when they resumed their match. His attacks sped up and became more fluid, and Hinata had to fully focus her concentration to block him. Every time she blocked one of his punches or kicks, his grin became a little wider, and Hinata found herself smiling a little as well. He really should have participated in the after-class sparring, she mused as she ducked under a looping roundhouse kick. She swept his supporting leg, but Naruto twisted sideways with the motion and landed in a handstand. His waist twisted and the foot she'd swept came arcing towards her face. She leaned back to avoid it, and as it passed she struck the back of his calf with the heel of her hand. This sent Naruto's lower body off balance to the left. He should have fallen to the ground, but he'd anticipated this and flexed his elbows, throwing his upper body into the air even as his legs rotated to the ground. He ended up on his feet in a comically wide stance, but the rotation brought his upper half in close to Hinata and his left hand came up inside her guard. She tried to flinch back from the fist rising toward her jaw, but it was too late. She closed her eyes and felt her head jolt. Instead of the expected pain of impact, her chin felt very warm. She opened her eyes, realizing that she'd dropped her Byakugan in her surprise. Naruto's hand was wrapped around the point of her chin, his fingers warm on her cheeks. "Gotcha," he said, chuckling happily. He withdrew his hand as she blinked at him. "I was moving too fast to be sure, so I opened my hand." He frowned. "It didn't hurt, did it?" Hinata shook her head, not trusting her voice. She knew she was blushing, but also realized that her whole face was red from exertion, so it hopefully did not show. In fact, she was dripping with sweat and it was becoming difficult to keep her arms from trembling. Naruto's face was a little flushed, but that was it. She was a little disturbed that he wasn't even breathing very hard. "Very good, both of you," Kurenai-sensei called out. "Adaptation, improvisation. But your weaknesses are not your techniques. Experience will only improve you both." Kurenai sparred with Shino next, to give them a breather. Predictably, her sensei was noticeably faster and stronger than Shino. Hinata's attention, however, was focused more on the blonde sitting on the grass next to her. He didn't even look like he'd been exercising now, and she wondered if he'd just been playing with her while they were sparring. "I should have known I wasn't really that good," she mused reproachfully as she pressed her forefingers together. She was jolted out of her thoughts by Naruto's elbow. "All those palm strikes were times you would have used chakra to shut me down?" he asked her. Hinata nodded silently. Aside from Kurenai explaining the reasons why they trained together, it wasn't that like Jayukin was that big a secret. Her family's famous techniques were described, in a general fashion, during the history lectures at the Konoha Ninja Academy. Naruto rubbed at the back of his head. "Then I guess I got you twice and you would have demolished me at least a dozen. That's pretty good." Hinata turned and stared at the boy, but he didn't seem to be mocking her. Kurenai smiled as she put Shino through the ringer. The boy was a little larger and physically stronger than his teammates, and for the most part he hadn't been challenged that much the day before. She had a feeling that the boy was actually a bit more talented than he let on. As reserved as the boy's father had been, she realized that she shouldn't be surprised that his son would treat the academy like an infiltration assignment. In the back of her mind, Kurenai again wondered at how clueless the academy examiners seemed to be. "If we are teaching children to be shinobi," she mused, "then why should we expect straightforward tests of their abilities to be accurate? Some students would excel at those, of course." The Uchiha boy, Sasuke, seemed to have something to prove, so he would of course push himself to become the top of his class. But those might prove to be the exceptions. She'd stayed after the meeting where the genins were assigned and grilled Irika for everything he could tell her about his charges. The Chiryunin was a little disconcerted by her attention, but gratified that she was actually interested in his observations, as well as the examination grades. In those, Shino was said to be merely average at Taijutsu. He was more than capable of defeating someone without training, but was barely above the bottom third of his class at the academy. But now, placed on the spot against a superior opponent, the boy was executing blocks and counters at a level of proficiency approaching that of a Chiryunin. "You've been holding out on us," she accused as she drove a spearhand strike at his midsection. He silently blocked with the edge of his wrist and sent a back fist strike against her temple. Kurenai stepped into it and blocked with her forearm. She brought up an unnoticed knee and tapped Shino in the stomach. He nodded, acknowledging her point, and stepped back into a ready stance again. She sent a kick at his midsection, but when he went to block, she pulled her foot back, rechambered the kick, and launched it again at his head. He ducked his head, but her heel clipped his shoulder on the way down. Shino drove 2 fingers into the hollow of her knee and she barely managed to pull her leg back before his nerve strike numbed it. "You didn't learn that at the academy," she observed as he deflected a ridge hand strike she aimed at his floating ribs. "Extra training with your family?" she asked as she blocked his counter-strike at her stomach. Shino pushed back against her block and his feet slipped backwards a few inches on the grass. That evidently was his aim, as that motion gave him enough room to bring his foot up and kick. She caught his ankle between her palms and gave his leg a sharp twist. He leapt upward and retracted his leg, pulling himself closer for a knife hand strike at her face. The move was unexpected and well-timed, and she barely pulled her head back in time to avoid it. As it was, his fingertips ghosted across the skin of her forehead. She used her grip on his ankle to throw him back and he somersaulted backwards once before rolling onto his feet and rising into a low crouch. "Very good, Shino," Kurenai said approvingly. But if you wish to remain on this team, you will not hold back during our training sessions. I can understand your caution within the academy, but there should be no secrets between teammates. She saw Naruto give a guilty start out of the corner of her eye and knew he'd gotten the message as well. Shino merely nodded at this, which she accepted with good grace. She'd get him talking. Eventually. Maybe. After that, Naruto sparred with Shino, and had a noticeably harder time landing a hit than he did the day before. Kurenai also took the opportunity to work with Hinata on her blocking techniques. Kobaru-sensei had done the same for her, many years ago. There were ways to angle the arms and legs that increased one's leverage. These modified blocks were not taught at the Konoha Ninja Academy because they required superior speed and timing to execute properly. For an agile kunoichi who possessed less upper body strength than her male counterparts, however, they were ideal. Hinata took to the techniques avidly, and Kurenai could tell she was flattered to be getting any individual instruction at all. If she didn't already despise Hayashi, the Hyuga girl's reactions would drive her to do so. When she explained why she was showing the girl the alternate techniques, Hinata just nodded thoughtfully. Kurenai was embarrassed to remember how she had given Kobaru a very hard time about his insinuation that she was weaker than Matai or Namaru. After about half an hour of this, switching off sparring partners every few minutes, Kurenai found all of her genins to be somewhat worse for the wear. Naruto's new uniform was covered with dust and bits of grass from all the times he'd been knocked down. At the same time, he was also smiling broadly as he helped Hinata, who'd slipped to one knee after successfully blocking his last kick. The Hyuga girl was red-faced and barely able to stand, and Shino's chest moved rapidly enough to inform his teacher that he was breathing hard. All right, that's a good start. We can walk to cool down and let our muscles relax. I can tell we definitely need to work on endurance training. Make sure you follow the exercises I gave you, and ask me if anything is unclear. With that, she led them out of the training area and through the outskirts of the village. The villagers they passed had very different reactions to the genins placed in her charge. Hinata's eyes and unadorned forehead marked her as a member of one of Konoha's oldest and most powerful families. People who didn't know her gave her at least a respectful nod, and she returned those she noticed. Shino's clothing and glasses marked him as an abarame, and most people gave him a wide berth. A few glanced downward at their arms and legs, as if to make sure a bug hadn't crawled up onto them. Kurenai did have to wonder how commonplace it was for a member of Shino's clan to tag the people around them with the scent-producing female Kikai bugs. The one she'd worked with explained that it helped him differentiate his teammates to the allies he'd stationed on guard duty. It also proved useful when a member of their team had been ambushed and wounded, and they needed to find him quickly. Of course, that didn't mean she was comfortable with the idea of someone ordering a bug to crawl onto her body and hide itself. She'd probably need to talk to Shino about that the next time she could speak to him alone. While Shino seemed either uninterested or unperturbed by the villagers' reactions, the same could not be said of Naruto. Maybe it was his acceptance by Iruka, maybe it was her own agreement that his treatment was unjustified. In any event, as Naruto received his normal allotment of angry glares and muttered oaths, he began to glare back. Soon he was walking with his hands fisted at his sides, on legs stiff with anger and resentment. Privately, Kurenai wondered if this wasn't a healthier attitude for him than his previous denial. At the same time, it wouldn't do for him to get into an altercation with random villagers. She resolved to let him work through his feelings on his own, but keep a close eye on him and offer advice if asked. By the time they'd arrived at the Hokage's tower, everyone appeared to have recovered from the sparring. She led them up the stairs to the top floor, and told the Chiyunins on duty that they were Team 8 reporting for assignment. At her words, she noticed Naruto straighten his posture with pride, and even Hinata stopped looking downward for a moment. The Sandaime looked pleased to see them, and his eyes seemed to linger on Naruto's new clothes. His eyes then met hers, and she couldn't suppress a mild blush at the approval she saw in them. "You're just in time, Jonin Kurenai," the Hokage said. "We still have a few D-rank missions left." Kurenai inclined her head respectfully as the old man shuffled through a stack of papers on his desk. "There we are," he said, pulling one out. "I need you to report to herbalist Yukitaza in the Western District, near the river. He suffered a broken leg last week while working on his roof and needs some help." Kurenai led her students down to the exit, trying not to laugh at the confusion on Naruto's face, and echoed somewhat on Hinata's. As a new genin team, she began before they even had a chance to ask her, you will be assigned D-rank missions until you have completed a good number of them. She specifically avoided saying how many, because she wanted to have the option of delaying their first C-rank mission until she was sure they were ready. D-rank missions, she continued, are judged to be little or no threat, and should rarely, if ever, involve travel beyond the outer walls of Konoha. They are tasks that still need doing, will give you all an opportunity to practice working together, and will supply you with a little pocket money when you are done. She paused on a street corner while they digested this. Naruto still looked a little rebellious, but resigned to his fate. She stepped up the pace a little as they made their way to the western quarter of the village. When she rang the bell at the door of the house described in the mission briefing, a voice called out for them to come around to the rear deck. Herbalist Yukitaza proved to be a middle-aged unmarried man with a large cast on his left leg. He made a short double take when he recognized Naruto, but didn't react in any other way. Soon, Kurenai and Shino were working on the roof repairs, the Abarame boy having reluctantly mentioned helping his father perform a similar task last winter. Hinata and Naruto were put to work weeding the client's large garden plot, a task better suited to their smaller statures. They'd been working for a few minutes when Kurenai was startled to realize that it was Naruto carrying the next load of wood up the ladder. She looked over at Shino, who just shrugged. "Naruto," she said puzzled, "I thought you were going to help Hinata with the garden." Naruto grunted and laid the boards down on the shallow pitched roof. "There wasn't enough room," he said. Kurenai frowned and looked out over the backyard. Hinata was working on the garden plot, along with about 20 Narutos. Kurenai turned back to Naruto. "They can all work independently?" she asked. Bun's were usually only capable of limited thought, following simple and straightforward commands. Naruto shrugged. "Why shouldn't they?" he asked. Kurenai wasn't quite sure how to answer that question. Naruto shook his head and turned to go back down the ladder. Unfortunately, he evidently forgot about the stack of boards he'd just put down, because he tripped over them and tumbled off the roof. Kurenai lunged forward, hoping to catch the boy, but it was too late. She reached the edge of the roof just as Naruto hit the ground, and disappeared in a puff of smoke. She stopped, staring at the vapors that rapidly dissipated. "I was talking to one of his bunshin and didn't even realize it," she mused. "What the hell is that boy?" She looked out at the garden, where Hinata had just grabbed Naruto's arm to prevent him from pulling up a plant that wasn't a weed. He scratched at the back of his head, embarrassed, not even noticing how Hinata pulled her hands back from his arm like they were burned. Not did he notice her blush, for all that it was brighter than his own. "He's Uzuamki Naruto," Kurenai reminded herself ruefully, "and he breaks the rules without even realizing it." Naruto and Hinata finished the garden in less than 20 minutes, with a clone starting at both ends of each row and Hinata using her Byakugan to supervise. With her ability to look in all directions at once, she could see if he missed anything or was about to pull something that wasn't a weed. The latter happened a little more often than Naruto would have liked, but Hinata didn't tease him about it. In fact, she seemed to worry that she wasn't doing her fair share of the work. Naruto wasn't any expert on girls, or kunoichi, by any stretch of the imagination. But he suspected that most of his female classmates would have been glad of an excuse to not get their hands dirty, rather than worrying that they weren't doing enough. He tried to tell Hinata that he appreciated her attitude, but when the words came out of his mouth it sounded more like, "I like how you're like a boy," instead of a girl, and she became very upset and then confused when he tried to explain. "I mean, you're not like Sakura or Ino," he said quickly. Hinata ducked her head down and looked even sadder. I know," she said hesitantly. "But that's a good thing," Naruto said quickly. "Did she like Sakura and Ino?" He wondered. "I don't remember ever seeing them talk, but they are all girls, they're like some secret society." It is?" she asked. Her forefingers were pressed together so hard that the skin had turned white. I mean, they are nice and all. I'm not saying they are ugly or anything," Naruto added quickly. If they were all friends and it got back to those two that he said they were ugly, genin, or not, he was a dead shinobi. Hinata frowned, perplexed. "Ano. She swallowed. "Naruto-kun, I don't understand what you mean. I'm just saying, well. I'm glad you're on my team," Naruto said firmly. "There. No one could interpret anything bad out of that, right?" Hinata stiffened like she'd been slapped, then quickly turned away. Naruto's mouth dropped open. He started to step around her to ask what he'd said when she pointed at one of his clones. Stop. He's about to pull a good plant, she said in a choked voice. Naruto whirled toward the offending clone. You heard her, he barked. Take it easy, Baka, the clone said. You're acting like she's your girlfriend or something. An instant later the clone disappeared as Naruto's fist transited through the space its head once occupied. Sorry, he apologized. Sometimes they get a little smart-mouthed when they know their time is almost up. We appear to be almost done, Naruto, Hinata said in a quiet voice, still not facing him. I will go inside and help Yukataza-san with the kitchen. Naruto glared at the remaining bunchin as Hinata silently walked toward the house. All of them stayed bent over, peering carefully at the ground as they finished the weeding. After finishing outside, Naruto went indoors to help with the cleaning. Hinata was silent as he passed through the kitchen, very intently focused on dicing up some vegetables herbalist Yukitaza had delivered earlier that day. After locating the cleaning supplies, Naruto created another set of clones and put them to work tidying up. Fortunately, this was something he knew quite well how to do, having had to clean up his own apartment for years. He finished as Kurenai and Shino came down from the roof. Naruto sent his clones out to put away the tools and the ladders. Hinata was still busy in the kitchen, so Naruto and Shino were sent to make some deliveries to their clients' customers. Kurenai-sensei decided she would help Hinata finish. She gave Naruto a piercing look as she announced this, and he felt the back of his neck grow hot. As he ran down the street with a small bundle of herbs, Naruto tried to figure out what he'd done wrong. It wasn't like he'd asked the stupid bunchin to mouth off. Maybe Hinata thought it was saying something Naruto was thinking, and that was why she'd been offended. It sort of made sense in a way. Sakura always hit him soon after he'd asked her out. Naruto realized that his attempts to be friendly with her seemed to always make her angry at him. Maybe it was something about him, maybe it was some aura given off by that bastard fox. Perhaps it was a side effect of the seal used to imprison his unwanted tenant. Maybe a seal strong enough to repel a demon would also repel any girls he came into contact with as well. He scowled as he knocked on the door of his bundle's destination. An old woman opened it and Naruto handed her the package before she had a chance to realize who he was. This is from herbalist Yukitaza. He broke his leg and can't make his own deliveries today. With that, he spun and was halfway back to the street before the woman had a chance to speak. Naruto stuffed his hands into his jacket pockets as he made his way back to the herbalist's newly cleaned and repaired house. It was bad enough how people hated him for something that happened the day he was born, but now he was pissing off everyone else, even when he was trying to be nice. When he returned to the house, Hinata and Kurenai had finished up in the kitchen. With the deliveries made, the last tasks for their mission were completed. The herbalist thanked them for their help, and even looked Naruto in the eye, which impressed him a little. Not quite an hour and a half, Kurenai said after they made their goodbyes. That was very quick. Good use of your bunshins, Naruto, and coordinating with Hinata to make sure there were no problems. I'm very pleased with your teamwork, both of you. Naruto felt the knot of resentment in his middle loosen a bit. Hinata's reaction, however, caught his eye. She looked down, pushing her fingers together as her cheeks turned red. When she noticed him staring, she turned completely away. He frowned and let out a sigh. Evidently she was still mad at him or something. As they made their that all for what if Naruto found Uzuamki library. If you like the story so far, please show your support by liking the video and subscribing to my channel, and show your support to the author by following the link down in the description. Thanks for listening, and until next time.